In a quiet suburb of Dallas, Texas, Henry Marlowe sat alone in his modest living room. At 62, his life was a stark contrast to the bustling days he had once known. The walls around him were adorned with pictures of his family from happier times, his late wife, smiling in the sunshine, his 2 children, now grown and far away, busy with lives of their own. The house, once full of laughter and activity, now echoed with silence. Henry had worked hard his entire life. As a mechanical engineer, he spent decades providing for his family, ensuring his children had opportunities he never did. But when his wife passed away a decade ago after a long battle with cancer, the world seemed to tilt off its axis. His children, Michael and Emily, had tried to keep him company at first, but life pulled them in different directions: careers, families, new cities. Henry didn't blame them. He wanted them to live their lives. Still, the loneliness crept in like an unwelcome guest, settling in the corners of his heart. In the years that followed, Henry filled his days with routine. He fixed things around the house, tended to his small garden, and read books he'd always meant to get to. But as time went on, he found himself longing for more, someone to talk to share the quiet moments with. His son Michael, ever the practical one, suggested he try connecting with people online. "Dad, there's a whole world out there," Michael said during one of his visits. "You can join groups for people your age, meet new friends. It might help." At first, Henry was skeptical. The idea of chatting with strangers on the internet seemed foreign, almost ridiculous. But one evening, with nothing but a lukewarm cup of tea and an empty house for company, he decided to give it a try. He signed up for an online forum for retirees, a space where people shared stories, hobbies, and advice about navigating life after retirement. The interactions were simple at first, commenting on posts about gardening tips or sharing a recipe for apple pie. But as Henry grew more comfortable, he began to participate in conversations, even striking up the occasional private chat. It felt good to connect, even in this small way. One evening, as he scrolled through a thread about favorite travel destinations, a private message popped up on his screen. The sender was Amanda, a young woman who had left a thoughtful comment on one of his posts earlier. "Hi, Mr. Henry," the message read. "I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed your story about visiting Yellowstone. You write so vividly, it reminds me of the way my grandfather used to tell stories. I hope I can be as wise as you someday." Henry smiled, a warmth spreading through him. He hadn't expected to hear from someone so young. Amanda was 24, she told him later, a college student studying graphic design in New Orleans. She explained that she often felt out of place among her peers, gravitating instead toward the wisdom and stories of older generations. Their conversation flowed effortlessly. Amanda was bright, curious, and full of compliments that made Henry feel valued in a way he hadn't in years. She asked about his life, his family, his work. She listened with genuine interest, or so it seemed.
Over time, their chats became a nightly routine. Amanda would ask about his day, share her struggles with school and work, and sometimes talk about the family she had lost in a car accident years ago. She lived with her grandmother, she said, and often felt the weight of responsibility on her young shoulders. "You remind me so much of my grandfather," Amanda wrote one evening. "He was my rock, always giving me advice and making me feel safe. I don't know why, but I feel like I can trust you the same way." Henry's heart swelled at her words. He had always been a protector, a provider. To feel needed again, even by a stranger across a screen, was like a salve to his loneliness. But Amanda's charm masked a darker truth. She was no innocent young woman looking for guidance and connection. Behind her kind words and earnest demeanor was a cunning mind and a carefully crafted plan. Amanda was part of a small but effective group in New Orleans that preyed on older, vulnerable individuals. She knew exactly how to identify her targets, people like Henry, who craved companionship and were eager to trust. The game was a cruel one, but Amanda was a master. She studied Henry's words, learning his likes and dislikes, his vulnerabilities, and his insecurities. Every compliment, every story, was designed to pull him deeper into her web. "Mr. Henry," she said one night, do you ever feel like the world is just too big? Like you're searching for something, but you don't know what? I do, he replied. It's why I joined this group, I guess. I just wanted to feel connected again. Well, Amanda wrote back, I'm glad you did. I think we were meant to meet. Henry didn't see the red flags. He didn't question why a young, beautiful woman would spend hours each night talking to a man his age. He didn't notice how their conversations subtly shifted, how Amanda began to confide in him more and more, painting herself as someone in need of help and guidance. One evening, Amanda brought up her financial struggles. It started as an offhand comment, I hate to bother you with this, but things have been really tough lately. I'm behind on tuition, and I don't know how I'm going to make it through the semester. Henry's heart ached for her. He knew what it was like to struggle, to feel the weight of financial burdens. Without hesitation, he offered to help. Don't worry about it, Amanda, he said. I'll send you something to get you through. You're like family to me now. Her response was effusive, filled with gratitude and promises to pay him back. But Henry didn't care about the money. Helping Amanda made him feel alive, purposeful. He didn't realize that this was only the beginning. As the weeks went on, Amanda's requests became more frequent and larger. There was always a reason: tuition, rent, medical bills for her grandmother. And each time, Henry obliged, convinced he was doing the right thing. Amanda made sure to keep him hooked, showering him with affection and promises of a future where they might meet in person. For Henry, the possibility of meeting Amanda was a dream he hadn't dared to admit, even to himself. For Amanda, it was the next step in her plan, a step that would lead Henry down a path from which there would be no return. Henry Marlowe sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand, staring at his laptop screen. Amanda's latest message blinked in his inbox, and he clicked it with anticipation. Over the past few weeks, their conversations had deepened. Amanda now felt like a part of his life, someone he looked forward to hearing from every day. But this message was different, it wasn't filled with her usual warmth or playfulness. Instead, it carried a weight that Henry couldn't ignore. Mr. Henry, I hate to bring this up, but I'm feeling so overwhelmed. My landlord is threatening to evict me because I'm behind on rent. I've tried everything, but I don't know what to do. I'm embarrassed even to ask, but I thought maybe you could help. I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I can. Henry's heart sank. Amanda had become more than just a friend, she was someone he cared about deeply. The thought of her struggling, possibly losing her home, felt unbearable. He wanted to protect her, to be the steady presence she so clearly needed. Without hesitation, he responded. Amanda, don't worry about it. I'll send you what you need. How much are you short? Her reply came quickly, her gratitude spilling through the screen. She needed $1,200 to cover the balance. It was a significant amount for Henry, but he didn't think twice. He logged into his online banking and transferred the money to the account Amanda provided. You've saved me, Mr. Henry, she wrote. I don't know how to thank you. You're my guardian angel. Henry's heart swelled at her words. For the first time in years, he felt truly needed. Helping Amanda wasn't just an act of kindness, it was a lifeline for him, too. He didn't notice the pattern forming, the way Amanda's requests always came with just enough emotion to disarm him. As the days turned into weeks, Amanda's problems seemed to multiply. There was the overdue electricity bill, the unexpected car repair, and the medical expenses for her grandmother, who had supposedly fallen ill. Each time, Henry stepped in without question, transferring money to cover the costs. At first, the amounts were manageable. But gradually, the requests grew larger, and Henry began dipping into his savings. He told himself it was worth it. Amanda was like family now, and he couldn't bear to see her suffer. Still, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered warnings. Was he being too trusting? Could Amanda truly be in so much need? But Amanda had a way of quelling his doubts. She showered him with affection, calling him her hero, her rock. She even began hinting at the possibility of meeting in person. "I'd love to come visit you someday, Mr. Henry," she wrote. "You've done so much for me. I want to thank you in person." The idea thrilled Henry. For weeks, he'd dreamed of what it might be like to see Amanda face to face, to hear her laugh in person. The thought of finally meeting her felt like a light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. But Amanda always had an excuse. Her schedule was too hectic, her grandmother needed her, or she didn't have the money for travel. Henry offered to help cover her travel expenses, but she insisted she couldn't accept any more from him. "Maybe one day soon," she wrote. "I just need to get my life in order first. But I promise, we'll meet." While Henry clung to the hope of meeting Amanda, the people closest to him began to notice changes in his behavior. His daughter, Emily, called one evening to check in and immediately sensed something was off. "Dad, you've been so distracted lately," she said. "What's going on?" "Nothing, sweetheart," Henry replied, his voice too casual. "I've just been busy." "Busy with what?" "You're retired," Emily pressed. "You've been acting strange for weeks now. Are you okay?" Henry hesitated, debating whether to tell her about Amanda. But he knew how skeptical Emily would be. She'd always been protective of him, warning him about scams and telling him to be careful online. She wouldn't understand. "I'm fine, really," he insisted. "Just trying to stay connected with people, like you suggested." Emily didn't buy it, but she decided not to push, at least not yet. Still, the conversation left her uneasy. She resolved to keep a closer eye on her father. Meanwhile, Amanda was laying the groundwork for her next move. She knew Henry was fully invested in their relationship, and she was ready to take things to the next level. One evening, during one of their nightly chats, she brought up the idea of Henry visiting her in New Orleans. "I'd love for you to come here, Mr. Henry," she said. "It would mean so much to me to finally see you. And I could show you around the city. It's beautiful here, you'd love it." The idea thrilled and terrified Henry in equal measure. He'd never traveled much since his wife passed, and the thought of venturing to a new city alone was daunting. But the chance to see Amanda, to finally bridge the gap between their online connection and real life, was too tempting to resist. "I'll think about it," he replied. "It's been a long time since I've traveled anywhere." "Take your time," Amanda said, her tone sweet and encouraging. "But it would mean the world to me." Over the next few days, Amanda continued to plant seeds of excitement, sending Henry pictures of New Orleans landmarks and telling him about the places she wanted to show him. Her messages painted a picture of a future filled with companionship and adventure, and Henry couldn't help but be drawn in. Finally, he made up his mind. He would go to New Orleans. Henry spent the next week planning his trip, keeping it a secret from Emily. He knew she'd try to talk him out of it, and he didn't want to dampen his excitement. He booked a flight, packed his suitcase, and even bought a small gift for Amanda, a silver bracelet he thought she'd like. As he prepared for the journey, Henry felt a mixture of nerves and hope. This trip wasn't just about meeting Amanda, it was about taking a leap of faith, reclaiming a sense of purpose and connection he thought he'd lost forever. But on the other side of the screen, Amanda was preparing for something entirely different. Her messages remained warm and encouraging, but behind the facade, she and her accomplices were putting the final touches on a plan that would change Henry's life forever. Henry Marlowe stepped off the plane into the humid air of New Orleans. The excitement that had carried him through the flight now mingled with nervousness as he scanned the small crowd at the airport terminal. Then he saw her, Amanda. She was standing near the exit, her phone in hand, looking up with a radiant smile when their eyes met. She was even more beautiful than her pictures, Henry thought, his heart racing. Her wavy auburn hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and her green eyes sparkled with warmth. She waved eagerly and walked toward him, wrapping him in a hug that felt surprisingly natural. "It's so good to finally meet you," she said, her voice as cheerful as it had been in their late-night calls. Henry smiled, feeling a mix of relief and joy. "It's good to see you too, Amanda. You're even lovelier in person." Amanda blushed and took his hand. "Come on, let's get you settled. I've got so much to show you." The first evening passed like a dream. Amanda brought Henry to a cozy cafe near her apartment, where they talked for hours over bowls of gumbo and glasses of iced tea. She was attentive, hanging on to his every word, and he felt years younger in her presence. It was everything he had hoped for. When they returned to Amanda's small, modest apartment, she showed him the room she had prepared for him. It was simple but comfortable, and Henry felt at ease. As he unpacked, he handed her the small gift he had brought, a silver bracelet he had picked out especially for her. "Oh, Mr. Henry," Amanda said, her eyes widening in surprise. "This is beautiful. You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," he replied with a smile. "You've brought so much joy into my life. It's the least I could do." Amanda hugged him tightly. "You're too kind." "Thank you." For Henry, the trip felt like the beginning of something beautiful. For Amanda, it was the first step in executing her plan. The next morning, Amanda introduced Henry to two of her friends, Kyle and Marcus. They were young, friendly, and seemingly eager to make him feel welcome. Amanda explained that they lived in the same building and were like brothers to her. "We'll take good care of you while you're here," Kyle said with a grin. "Anything you need, just let us know." Henry appreciated their hospitality, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something about them felt off. They were polite, but their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes, and there was a certain tension in the air whenever they were around. Still, he brushed it off, trusting Amanda implicitly. Over the next 2 days, Amanda showed Henry around the city. They visited Jackson Square, strolled through the French Quarter, and even took a riverboat ride on the Mississippi. Henry felt alive in a way he hadn't in years, and Amanda's presence only amplified his joy. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. On the third evening, Amanda mentioned some financial trouble. "I hate to bring this up," she said over dinner, her voice hesitant, "but my landlord is being difficult again. He says I owe him for some repairs, and I don't have enough to cover it. I feel awful even telling you this." Henry frowned. "How much do you need?" Amanda hesitated, looking down at her plate. "It's about $2,000. I know that's a lot, and I don't want to burden you, but..." I didn't know who else to turn to. Without a second thought, Henry agreed. "Of course, Amanda. I'll transfer it to you first thing in the morning." Amanda looked at him with wide, grateful eyes. "You're amazing, Mr. Henry. I don't know what I'd do without you." But as Henry handed over the money, Amanda's demeanor began to shift. She was still sweet and attentive, but there was a growing edge of distance in her tone. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, and she often excused herself to take calls in the other room. When Henry asked her about it, she brushed it off. "Just work stuff," she said. Nothing to worry about. The following day, things took a darker turn. Henry woke to find Amanda out, leaving a note that she'd gone to run errands. Kyle and Marcus, however, were in the apartment, sitting casually on the couch. Their presence felt intrusive, and Henry couldn't help but feel uneasy. "Where's Amanda?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "She'll be back soon," Kyle replied, his tone light but slightly dismissive. "She told us to keep you company." Henry nodded, though he felt a pang of discomfort. Something about the way Kyle and Marcus looked at him felt wrong, as if he were being sized up. He excused himself to his room, but his unease grew with each passing hour. That evening, when Amanda returned, she seemed distracted. Henry tried to engage her in conversation, but her answers were short, almost impatient. The warmth that had defined their relationship now felt forced, and Henry couldn't ignore the growing tension. Later that night, the situation escalated. As Henry prepared for bed, Amanda knocked on his door, her face pale and anxious. "Mr. Henry," she said, her voice trembling, "Kyle and Marcus are in trouble. They owe money to some dangerous people, and they don't know what to do. I promised I'd help, but I can't do it without you." Henry's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "They need $5,000, Amanda said, tears brimming in her eyes. "If they don't pay, these people might hurt them, or me. Please, Mr. Henry, I don't know what else to do." Henry hesitated. Something about the situation felt wrong, but Amanda's desperation was palpable. He didn't want to believe that she could be anything other than genuine. "Let me think about it," he said finally. Amanda nodded, her expression pleading. "Thank you. I'm so sorry to put you in this position." That night, Henry barely slept. Doubts swirled in his mind, battling with the affection and trust he had for Amanda. Could she really be in danger? Or was there something more sinister at play? The answer came the next morning, when Kyle and Marcus barged into his room, their polite demeanor replaced by menace. "You're gonna help us, old man," Kyle said, his voice cold. "Amanda says you've got the money." Henry froze, his heart pounding. "What is this? What's going on?" Marcus stepped closer, his tone sharp. "You've been sending her money for weeks. You really think she cares about you? She's been playing you, old man. Now, you're gonna give us what we need, or things are gonna get ugly." Henry's world crumbled. The trust he had placed in Amanda, the connection he had believed in, it had all been a lie. As the reality of his betrayal sank in, Kyle and Marcus made it clear that they wouldn't leave without the money. Henry, cornered and helpless, agreed to transfer the $5,000. By the time Amanda returned that evening, Henry was gone, emotionally and mentally shattered. The betrayal was complete, but the nightmare wasn't over. Amanda, Kyle, and Marcus had more in store, setting the stage for a final, devastating act that would leave Henry's life in ruins. Henry Marlowe sat in the small, dimly lit room Amanda had provided for him, the weight of the past few days pressing down on him like a physical burden. The warmth and joy he'd felt upon arriving in New Orleans had evaporated, replaced by fear, confusion, and a profound sense of loss. The people he had come to trust, Amanda, Kyle, and Marcus, had revealed their true colors, and Henry's world was now a fractured reflection of what he once believed. It started that evening when Amanda knocked on Henry's door, her face painted with an expression of regret, an act he now recognized as part of her manipulative charm. "Mr. Henry," she began, her voice trembling, "I know things have been overwhelming. I want to explain everything." Henry stared at her, his face blank. "Explain what, Amanda? How you lied to me? How you used me?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Henry wondered if she might actually feel remorse. "It's not like that," she insisted. "I care about you. I really do. But life hasn't been easy for me. You've been my only light in all of this." Henry felt his chest tighten. Even now, he wanted to believe her, wanted to think that their connection had been real. But the memories of Kyle and Marcus's threats, of the thousands of dollars he had sent to Amanda under false pretenses, crushed any lingering hope. "I don't think I can believe anything you say anymore," he said quietly. Amanda nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand. But let me at least make things right." "What do you mean?" Henry asked, his suspicion flaring. "I've arranged for Kyle and Marcus to leave," she said. "They won't bother you again. Tomorrow, I'll drive you to the airport, and you can go home. I'll even pay you back, little by little, I promise." The word sounded sincere, but Henry couldn't shake the feeling that this was another layer of the deception. That night, as Henry lay in bed, he heard voices outside his door. Amanda's soft, pleading tone was unmistakable, but it was accompanied by the gruff murmur of Kyle and Marcus. He couldn't make out their words, but the tension in their voices sent a chill down his spine. Moments later, the door burst open, and Kyle and Marcus stormed in. Amanda followed behind them, her face pale and unreadable. "Enough games, old man," Kyle snarled. "We know you've got more money, and you're gonna give it to us." Henry shot up from the bed, his heart pounding. "I don't have anything left," he said, his voice trembling. "You've taken everything." "That's not good enough," Marcus growled, stepping closer. "You're gonna transfer whatever's left in your accounts, or this ends badly for you." Henry turned to Amanda, searching her face for any sign of the woman he thought he knew. "Amanda, please. Don't do this." She looked away, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Just do what they say, Mr. Henry. It'll all be over soon." The betrayal in her voice was the final blow. Whatever hope Henry had clung to was shattered. He realized then that Amanda was not a victim of circumstance, as she had claimed, but the mastermind behind the entire scheme. As Kyle and Marcus forced him to sit at his laptop, their threats growing more menacing by the second, Henry's mind raced. He was out of options, out of resources, but not entirely out of fight. "Fine," he said, his voice steadying. "I'll do it. Just, let me log in." He opened his online banking account, his fingers trembling over the keyboard. Kyle leaned over his shoulder, watching every move, while Marcus stood by the door, blocking any chance of escape. Amanda hovered in the background, her expression unreadable. But as Henry navigated the site, he spotted an opportunity. There was a button to report fraud and lock the account, a small glimmer of hope in the chaos. With a deep breath, he clicked it, praying the others wouldn't notice. "What's taking so long?" Kyle snapped, growing impatient. It's asking me to confirm my password again," Henry stammered. Kyle grabbed the laptop, scowling at the screen. But before he could process what was happening, Henry lunged for the door, shoving Marcus out of the way with a strength born of sheer desperation. The younger man stumbled, caught off guard, and Henry bolted into the hallway. "Get him!" Kyle roared, but Henry was already sprinting toward the stairwell. Henry burst out into the humid New Orleans night, his heart pounding like a drum. He didn't stop running until he reached the corner of a busy street, where he flagged down a passing police car. Breathless and shaking, he explained everything to the officers: Amanda, the money, the threats. The police acted swiftly, storming the apartment minutes later. Kyle and Marcus were arrested on the spot, and Amanda's attempts to feign innocence were quickly dismantled, and the officers found evidence of her role in the scam on her phone and laptop. Her messages to Kyle and Marcus, detailing how to manipulate Henry, painted a damning picture. Back in Dallas, Henry struggled to pick up the pieces of his life. His savings were gone, his trust shattered, and the loneliness he had tried to escape felt heavier than ever. But he refused to let Amanda's betrayal define him. With the help of his daughter, Emily, he began to rebuild, not just his finances, but his sense of self-worth. The legal proceedings against Amanda, Kyle, and Marcus brought some closure. All three were convicted of fraud, theft, and conspiracy, receiving lengthy sentences. Amanda's courtroom apologies rang hollow to Henry, who had already decided to leave her behind in every sense. In the months that followed, Henry became an advocate for online safety, speaking to senior groups about the dangers of internet scams. His story served as a cautionary tale, but also a testament to resilience. Though his trust had been exploited, Henry chose to use his experience to help others, finding purpose in protecting those who might fall into the same traps. Henry Marlowe's journey had begun with hope and ended in betrayal, but it wasn't without redemption. He learned to trust himself again, to find strength in his scars, and to value the connections that truly mattered, like the bond with his daughter, Emily, who had stood by him through it all. As he sat in his garden one quiet morning, watching the sunflowers sway in the breeze, Henry felt a sense of peace. The world was not without its dangers, but it was also filled with second chances. And this time, Henry vowed, he would choose wisely.